Well, folks, here we are again for the weekly forecast. Before we get into that main forecast, let's take kind of a retrospective look over this past week. Of course, last week we talked about an upper air low that would be moving out of the central Rockies during the midweek period and sliding eastward. And at that time, the models were indicating that we had have a fairly decent shot of moisture across at least the southern half of the state. That actual low pressure system shifted a little bit farther south as it made its eastward movement, and we've seen most of the major precipitation falling across central and northern Kansas instead of southern Nebraska. So once again, another missed opportunity, and unfortunately it doesn't look like we have any significant opportunities until we get into at least late next week. So harvest activity weather should be very conducive. And of course, as we look at see where we stood as of Sunday, 36% of the corn crop has been reported to be harvested. We're starting to see movement toward the bean harvest. Overall conditions look very, very good for harvest activity, so we expect that the corn harvest numbers are probably going to approach the 50% mark. Now, when you compare this against the 5-year average, for this time we should be right around 5% harvested, so we are way ahead, and even way ahead of last year where we had a rather rapid harvest. So we're going to be looking for moisture. Unfortunately, there's nothing in the forecast or in the near term, but let's take a look at the upper air models and see how this week is supposed to pan out as we progress through the Monday through Friday time period. And the one thing I'll draw your attention to is there's really nothing in the central part of the country to generate any precipitation. We have a trough over the Great Lakes and a slight little trough trying to make its way into the northern plains, but overall we expect sunny skies today. We're looking at highs in the east somewhere in the mid-70s. As we get into far western Nebraska, where a little bit warmer conditions, we'll expect highs around the 80-degree mark. By the time the game kicks off in Lincoln, we'll probably be looking at temperatures that'll be right around the mid-60s, and by the time the game is over, we'll be dropping into the upper 50s. Now, as we go into tomorrow, what we're going to notice is that we try to see a weak trough trying to build in from this upper air low across the Great Lakes, and there is a little piece of moisture that's going to stream down on the front edge of the ridge in the western United States, and that might give us a chance of scattered, isolated showers late in the day, and then possibly carrying over into Monday across extreme eastern Nebraska. But the air is so dry, I don't expect that we're going to see anything more than maybe of 1/10 of an inch total precipitation output. As we go into Monday, we see that that trough is in place. We are going to see a little slight cool down, especially in the northeast where we're closer to this upper air low. We're looking at highs that will be in the upper 60s. But as you get into western Nebraska, closer to the ridge, we'll be looking at highs that will be approximately in the low to mid 80s. Now, as we go into Tuesday, we're going to start to see that ridge trying to build its way in. We'll still be looking at highs a little bit warmer in the northeast, probably the low 70s, and we'll see temperatures in the low to mid 80s across the west with no precipitation expected. Now, as we go into Wednesday, we start to see a trough trying to make its way, a broad trough trying to make its way down through the northern plains, and it's going to be a slow mover. So we'll be looking at a little bit warmer temperatures as we get a southwest wind. We'll be looking at highs in the mid to upper 70s across the northeast to the mid 80s across portions of the southwest. Now, as we go into Thursday, this trough starts to shake its way down a little bit farther south, so the warm air is going to be confined right along the southern border of Nebraska. We'll be looking at highs somewhere in the low to mid 80s, and as we get into extreme northern Nebraska, we'll be looking at highs probably early in the day in the low 70s, and as we get into Friday, now the trough starts to make its way down. They're keeping the heavy moisture up across the Dakotas, but with the southward progression of these models have been showing a bias where they've been placing the moisture too far north. Perhaps this is our opportunity to see that moisture shift into Nebraska. We're definitely going to see some cooler conditions in the mid 60s for the north to around the mid 80s or so to the extreme southeast. Now, as we go to 8 to 14-day forecast, we see that cooler than normal temperature trend starts to build into our region, and in terms of precipitation, we keep the wet to our east and the dry to our west. Now, the new 30-day forecast for the month of October has shown a broad area of above normal temperatures, and in terms of precipitation, the only good news I can say about this, at least we're not showing the entire state with below normal conditions.